this important topic. So I don't think there's too much needing to be done about why the period of youth is such an important time, because we have all had the pleasure of being a youth, and we also know the benefits that brings to one, and you appreciate those more and more as time goes on, but even while you are a youth, hopefully, and you utilize your time the way that you need to. The quest for meaning is another bigger issue, and it's even a larger issue at the time of a pandemic, I think. Many people haven't had to go through a pandemic before, but for some of our youth these days, it seems like what they know about life is the pandemic, and that has certainly made life a different thing. I was talking to my 11-year-old twin granddaughters, and they were saying, we really don't know what it's like to be at a graduation. I've heard that there's cake and other things going on at this party. And I said, oh, well, I guess you're going to have to wait and see what happens in the future, because life as we know it has changed for a period of time. And I said, I don't think I had responded very sympathetically. And my daughter said, Dad, it's kind of upsetting for them. I said, oh, well, the cake was good and stuff, but there's lots of other fun things to do as well. It's interesting that spirituality and the quest for spirituality has risen much higher since the pandemic. It's almost as though we all got a giant timeout. And during that timeout, we've had a chance to reflect on our behavior and our thoughts and our activities, maybe a little more than we hoped for, but that reflection has certainly made a difference in our life. I'm really sorry about this, but I think I'm hearing somebody trying to get in. Just 1 second, I have to open the door. Well, that's one of the hardships of living alone. There's no one else to answer the door. So I apologize for that interruption. So, this idea of how this pandemic has intensified spirituality, in the Baha'i world, it's actually caused, at first when it happened, people are thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to our activities and how are things going to change? But in actual fact, the result all over the planet, not just here, is that we've doubled our activities, in some cases, tripled our activities. Of course, the form of those activities has changed, but in fact, the quality of them and the number of them has dramatically increased. And one has to think that if it is the case that spirituality is intensifying and prayers are intensifying and the desire of people to have a different world really is intensifying, then, we're going to see profound changes. And those changes have already started, and they're going to be more rapid. You can expect that. These prophecies of what was to happen at this time are many. And in fact, they're from all religions. And we're seeing a different kind of awakening that's taking place. And really, when it comes down to it, we're living at a time that when people think of something, they almost think that what they think about is the reality. It's as though each of us has the mind to create our own truth. And we actually can believe in our own truth and our own ideas. And if we're convincing or charismatic enough, we might be able to sell the ideas to somebody else and make that their reality. But it's Also really important for us to remember that truth is a very strong power, probably next to the power of love. It has a way of cutting through nonsense. It has a way of helping to clarify things in a manner that causes us to get rid of our own delusions. And it awakens us to more possibilities. At first, it might, I heard a line the other day that said, the truth will set you free, but at first it will make you really annoyed. And, and I thought that was a very good line, because, when our own delusions or our own ideas about what we're doing get dispelled or even shattered, or what we once thought was important becomes totally unimportant, then we somehow start to distill things down to some real truths. There's so many truths in spiritual knowledge that have come, prophecies and other things. And I was saying to my daughter the other day as well that, in the world, there's all these crises happening. Nobody would have thought that honestly, I don't think people would have thought in Canada that we could have burned entire cities out west, and we could have flooded the rest of them. And, all these things that are happening suddenly and with such force and impact, these are transformative experiences in the lives of people. When they once thought that this was what life was, and suddenly what you think life is disappears, then you're really taken down to, well, what is life? And what is the quest for meaning? And really, if I thought it was to have these things, and immediately those things are gone overnight, these have very powerful effects. Now, one thing I do want to clarify, because there's a lot of confusion about this, and that is that everything that is good from a Baha'i perspective, everything that is good has come from God. And everything that is bad or wrong or messed up has come from man. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't mean that man cannot do good things, but God never does things to harm his creatures. He actually doesn't have to. We do enough of that ourselves. And we set processes in motion that actually continue to expand like the ripples of water, and they create consequences. So if we think that God is, and yet whenever something goes wrong, we kind of blame him and we ask him why he's doing this, when in actual fact, we did it, and we're asking him for help out of this mess that we've created. So it's a very powerful thing for us to think about, because if you understand this principle, you will never believe that the God whom we love and know and worship would ever want to harm his creation any more than you would want to harm your own children. It was never his desire to harm his children, just like it would never be our desire to harm our children. And unfortunately, the level of understanding of God and the unknowable essence is that we constantly interact, when we interact with him, if we interact with him, we interact with him like he's to blame for everything, and he's the cause of everything, and how could he be like that? And as if we have no responsibility. Well, that's really very addictive behavior. That's addicts are the ones that never take responsibility, because they're addicted to doing what they want to do, and they don't care about the consequences. In fact, they'll blame everybody else but themselves, because they'll never take responsibility. Responsibility to an addict is like death. And this is the condition of humanity. We have become fairly delinquent in the sense that we don't want to follow anything that God has asked us to do unless we happen to feel like it, or unless we're in a big crisis, and then we're open to some ideas. And when we're threatened, and then we become much more open. It's regrettable, but that's the fact. My brother said he had a professor once that said, people only change enough to avoid future change. And that's an interesting statement, because it means, okay, I'm prepared to go along in some kind of comfort level until something dramatic happens. And then I have to rethink what's going on. But how much better if we could just blame somebody else, like we could blame God for this. Now, Abdul Baha also spends some time saying that a fortune teller can tell the future of what's going to happen. Because for some reason, that fortune teller is able to escape time and space and see the event early. And because he sees this event early, he brings that back and tells us about it. But the fact that he escaped time and space didn't mean that he caused it. It just meant that he was allowed to escape time and space. And so a lot of prophecies are generally like that. It isn't that God caused these things to happen because he told us about what was going to happen. He just simply saw what was going to happen as a result of our behavior. And he brought that to us. So prophecies are like that. So it's kind of interesting that, the Bible foretells all these things that are going to come, like floods and fires and all these things. And now science, which is the source of truth that humanity likes to worship, basically says exactly the same things, but it gives a cause to it. So in other words, now because we have science, we can explain why things are catching fire, why we're flooding, why all these things are happening. But does that help? Like, really, does that help? Did that actually change anything? Or do we feel better because now we can explain scientifically why it's happening, as opposed to God telling us it was going to happen anyway? So there are different sources of truth that, when I say, Baha'u'llah says, truth is one and the ignorant have multiplied it. So, okay, so science explains why these horrible things are happening, and we call it climate change and other things. Religion explained from a spiritual point of view and prophecy what was going to happen. So it hasn't really helped that science tells us how it happened. Now, because God said, behave yourself, do the right things, follow the right principles, and these things won't happen. But we really didn't want to do that because that didn't necessarily align with our feeling of the day. So we follow our own ideas. And you know what the theme song in hell is? I did it my way. So we'll sing that song all the way to wherever it is we're going. And we have some consequences, and that's not surprising. We were told what to do, we didn't do it. That makes us a delinquent. If a child doesn't listen to their parent over and over and over again and gets into trouble, you call that a delinquent. He may be a loving delinquent, he may be a manipulative delinquent, but he's still a delinquent. He's still going to go and do whatever he likes. And there are going to be consequences to that. Now, we know that from a spiritual point of view, we know that from a parental point of view, and we know that from a scientific point of view now. Science is telling us if you behave like delinquents when it comes to the environment, there are going to be big consequences, and we're experiencing them now. So how many ways, this is a really important question for the quest, how many ways do we have to know something before we actually believe it? And yet we've just held a giant climate conference where everybody is told every gloom and doom story you could ever imagine. And at the end of it, a couple of little rogues run off in another direction and say, we're really happy the world's all going to do this, but we're going to do whatever we like. We're not going to do that much. We hope you don't mind. Have a nice day. Now we know in 3 major ways, and probably more, why things are going the way they're going. But actually, none of that has stopped us from carrying on as if we can get away with it. And one has to say, is there an answer to this, or are we just going to blow it all up? Now, as a Baha'i, I was so excited when I heard about the faith because there were prophecies that went for the next 500,000 years. Well, that's pretty exciting. That means we're going to live for 500,000 years, doesn't it? That's a long time. So I'm sorry, but I won't be believing any of the total doom and gloom that we're all going to be gone. That's not going to happen. Because if we did believe that, we should stop having children immediately. And some of us are doing that, by the way, in case you haven't noticed. But the fact of the matter is, we know that it's going to go for 500,000 years. And to me, that's very hopeful. My mother was a Catholic, and she taught us that first the world was destroyed by water when Noah was around. And then later she said the next time it's supposed to be by fire. Well, as a teenager, I got fairly concerned about that. And when I found out that all the forest fires were happening in Canada at that time when I was 19, which was just a few years ago, It seems like that anyway, to me, but to others, it may be a long time. These fires were everywhere. And I thought, oh, this is it. It's going to happen. And then I found out that they managed to put them out. But I was interested in the faith because it said 500,000 years. That was the best news. I didn't have to worry about whether I was going to have children and grandchildren. 500,000 years it was going to go on. Now, there's going to be a lot of damage going on because we're still behaving like delinquents. And as long as I worked with delinquents for 30 years now, and they're lovely, but they get themselves into one mess after another. And sometimes you don't know if they're going to survive. And so that's really what the world's doing right now. So as a youth, what would I be doing? As a youth, what am I looking for? I need to be looking for something to make a difference to this mess that people keep getting us into. And probably, I've contributed as well. But the fact of the matter is, I'm pretty certain, in fact, I know, as I explained to you, that there are 3 different ways that we are sure that the world's a mess, and there are not too many answers about how to make it better. And the things that are man-made certainly don't seem to be working very well. There's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk, but when it comes to real action, what is going to change the character of a human being? It's not an easy thing to do. And, I've told this story before, but Mirza Qurban Ali was one of the martyrs. And he was quite a character. He was a very knowledgeable person that had studied all the sacred writings of Islam. And then he found himself in the position that he had to become a Babi because he believed that that was the answer to the world. And when he was brought before the Grand Vizier, who had just executed the Bab's uncle, he was asked if he would be kind enough to refuse to accept the teachings of the Bab, which would, of course, lead to those of Baha'u'llah. If he'd be kind enough to do that, he could be set free. Now, he was not able to do that. And the Grand Vizier said to him, listen, you are the most renowned person of this whole area. You're the most learned. If you said that you were the promised one, you would have 1,000 people that would follow you by morning. And then, and then I could set you free. And Mirza Qurban Ali said, well, in fact, more than 1,000 people would follow me by the morning if I said I was the promised one. So that didn't appear to be too humble, but he was making a statement based on his reputation. And then he said, but there's one problem. He said, I do not possess the power to change the human heart. This only the Sayyidi Bab has. He can transform hearts and make new creations out of beings. I cannot do it. And then the Grand Vizier became upset because he knew he was going to have to kill him. But he didn't want to do that still. So Mirza Qurban Ali saw him hesitating. And he said, my name is Mirza Qurban Ali. The Bab's name is Ali. My name is Qurban. Qurban means sacrifice. I was created to be a sacrifice for the Bab. The sooner you strike off my head, the happier I will be. And then the Grand Vizier became even more shaken by that because he couldn't believe that this guy was going to give up his life for one who was about to be killed, the Bab. So he said to him, you're starting to affect me. Take this. And he went to say, and Mirza Qurban Ali say, you don't have to worry. And the Grand Vizier asked, what do you mean? He said, this message is only for the pure in heart. That was very insulting to the Grand Vizier. He didn't like that very much. It didn't go down so well. And he told him, take him away and execute him. And don't bring the next 5 to me, just execute them if they won't deny the Bab. And when he went to the spot where the Bab's uncle had been decapitated, he rushed over and grabbed his body and held it to his breast without, of course, it was headless. And he said to the executioner, "Approach and strike your blow, for my faithful companion refuses to release me from his embrace and summons me to the next world to meet my beloved." And the executioner walked over and executed him, immediately threw down his sword, and spent the rest of his life telling the story that I just told you, because he said he would never kill another Babi as long as he lived, and he regretted forever that he had done that. This is the transformative power of the messenger of God. So the quest that we're really talking about, number one quest, is to find out, is Baha'u'llah who he says he is? And if he is, then to give everything to his cause. So that's what I would say is the quest. Because ultimately, as a Baha'i, our quest is to be a lover of the truth, no matter what, no matter whether it annoys us or other people. But we have to speak the truth, and we have to say what it is that is necessary. We may not be popular from that, but the fact of the matter is, we'll be sure about it. And having worked hard to do it doesn't mean we'll always be successful. If we're lovers of the truth and we speak the truth, then we will never regret anything in our life. It's departing from speaking the truth that we then start to feel uncomfortable about our life and what we've done. So the real quest is to dedicate ourselves to the truth and to speak the truth. And many people think they're speaking the truth now, and many people are making up the truth in their own minds, as opposed to the truth that God has articulated so well. There's a writing that says, "Contentment with the things his will hath provided, patience, nay, thankfulness in the midst of tribulation, and complete reliance in all circumstances upon him, these rank according to the estimate of God among the highest and most laudable of all acts. All other acts are and will ever remain secondary and subordinate unto them." So when we know the messenger of God and we know ourselves that he is the messenger of God, then the next step is we have to learn about contentment with the things his will hath provided, and patience with circumstances in the meantime. So it means we have to stay dedicated to advancing the truth and bringing the attention of these principles to others, because if we know the truth and we don't share the truth, then the people that have everything but the truth will take the stage, and they won't hesitate to do that. So I'm going to read you another writing, which is kind of interesting, which is very interesting, actually, if I can get it to work here. I don't know why we're doing this. Sorry about this. Just give me a moment. Okay. The cause, this is the cause of God. The cause has the spiritual power to recreate us if we make the effort to let that power influence us. And the greatest help in this respect is prayer. I'm going to read that again. The cause has the spiritual power to recreate us if we make the effort to let the power influence us. And the greatest help in this respect is prayer. So in order to receive that power, we have to let that power influence us. We must supplicate Baha'u'llah to assist us to overcome the failings in our own characters, and also exert our own willpower in mastering ourselves. So this is, this is probably the real quest in mastering our own self. And Abdu'l-Baha talks about the insistent self, which, our self and our selfish desires and our ego keeps coming back for more of us and wants to dominate us. And it's not because we're bad people, it's because we have dual natures. We have a higher nature and a lower nature. And so that's where the struggle is mostly. And to really be able to, once we find the truth, to embrace it and to work towards that goal, which is the revelation of God. Now, in order to do this, I want to read one other quote here. The power of God can entirely transmute our characters and make of us beings entirely unlike our previous selves. So I don't know if you like yourself, but if you don't, you could change yourself. But if you do, you could intensify the good qualities that you have. The power of God can entirely transmute our characters and make of us beings entirely unlike our previous selves. Through prayer and supplication, obedience to the divine laws Baha'u'llah has revealed, and ever-increasing service to his faith, we can change ourselves. So we can engage in those activities. And what are those activities? They're the core activities that the Baha'i community is rendering. We're not into rituals and dogmas, shaking this, wiggling this, doing any of these things. We're really into praying with people that the world will change. We're really into meditating, which is thinking deeply about our own behavior and the behavior of others, and applying teachings so that we can come up with new ideas and new solutions to our problems. And then studying the sacred writings through Rui books and other means, so that we can then think about how these writings apply to our life and how we can change them. And then the fourth way, of course, is to be of service to others. Abdu'l-Baha says the best thing that you can do for yourself is forget yourself. Think about other people. Think of what you could do for someone else. In fact, he even says when you're despondent and feeling down, you should just go and find somebody to do some service for, and you'll start to feel better. It's a very good therapy. Now, we're in a time when everybody thinks what they think is so important. That's rather arrogant, I think. The fact of the matter is, what God thinks we should be doing is what we need to be finding out. So if we can ask ourselves, would God think that this is a valuable thing for me to be doing? Would Abdu'l-Baha do this, the son of Baha'u'llah, the exemplar? Then that's a simple question. And usually you get a pretty quick answer. And if you want to keep doing it anyway, well, that's you just being delinquent, but you go ahead if you want to do it, because you're free to do it. You got free will. You can do whatever you want. One time I was driving with a bunch of youth in a van, and I heard them discussing in the back seat, do I want to be a believer or don't I want to be a believer? Maybe I'll wait till I'm 18 so I can have some fun before I do it. And I'm thinking, what kind of fun are they talking about? As if I didn't know. So then I said to them, do you honestly think that God has given a bunch of rules to the Baha'is and doesn't, and wants them all to behave a certain way, but he doesn't care what the rest of the people do? Is that your idea of what you think is happening? That is not what's going to be happening. I said, I don't know. Is that what you think? Oh, got to make some more. Then one of them looked at me and said, well, actually, we did until you asked that question. They weren't so happy with the question. I said, well, my father, he was interested in the faith. Like, I have 7 brothers and sisters and parents, and my father used to brag all my life about he'd never darkened the door of a church because he thought spiritual people were real hypocrites. That's what he thought. But he promised the priest when he married my mother that he'd raise us Catholics, so he did, but he still didn't. He still continued to brag about not darkening the door of a church. So, one time I remember he was very you know, he was like one by one, all his kids were becoming believers and Baha'is, and he was very proud of that because they behaved so much better when they became Baha'is. So his job became a lot easier. I think that was his main interest in it at the time. And I remember when my 8-year-old niece had him pasted up against a wall around the corner, and she's saying, "But Papa, I don't really understand why you're not a Baha'i." And he actually gave a whole bunch of reasons which he thought were deeply meaningful about what was keeping him back. And at the end of his speech to her, she said, "Papa, I still don't understand what you're talking about." And so he didn't feel like he could get away. So we said, we'll talk about that later. But I remember when he finally decided he wanted to be a believer, he said, "I believe in it for what it did to my family." So his faith was by the result of seeing actions and seeing what things were changing. So, you know, a lot of us want to talk about a lot of things, but we have to do a lot of things to make the difference we want to see. So I think we got to move from, you know, just words into something much more solid. And one thing that youth are really good at is action. Right now, Brett's and Maureen's son are up at the Bayfield house that we have with a bunch of youth studying deeply spiritual writings. And I don't know if they're supposed to be there with this with this pandemic, but I think they're keeping the numbers down. Sometimes I don't ask too many questions, but I think it's probably all legit. And I just talked to them. They're trying to get the hot tub running. I think that's for after activities. But you know, who said that you're supposed to be not having fun when you're exploring spirituality? We should be the happiest, most fun people on the planet because we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. We're trying to build the oneness of mankind. Now, once we have this quest for spirituality, it is the writings of God and our study of the writings of God that make us wise when we figure out how to apply them. If we don't study the writings, it's very hard to have wisdom, you know, so we got to do that for ourselves. You know, in the Baha'i faith, we don't believe you have to go outside of yourself to find wisdom and answers. We actually believe it's the opposite. The writings say you have to pose questions to your soul and your soul will answer. Well, this is very empowering. You know, it means that really any person has the capacity to pose questions to their soul and their soul can answer. And that's a really reflective process. So you don't need a bunch of people around to tell you what to do. Although most people are more than willing to tell you what to do. If you haven't seen that experience, I have some friends I can introduce you to. But the fact is, you can pose the questions to your own soul and it will answer. Of course, it answers so much better when you've educated it a little more. And that's what the writings do. So when you take the writings in and you ask your soul questions, you start to develop this capacity of wisdom. And Baha'u'llah states, above all else, the greatest gift and the most wondrous blessing hath ever been and will continue to be wisdom. Wisdom is the greatest gift. It is man's unfailing protector. So yes, you can do anything you want, but it's not the brightest to do anything you want. Yes, you can wear whatever you like, but at least make yourself a little bit lovable. You know, it's important that we see that we need protection by acting with wisdom. It aideth him and strengtheneth him. Wisdom is God's emissary and the revealer of his name, the omniscient. Through it, the loftiness of man's station is made manifest and evident. So your station is manifest and evident when you act with wisdom. It is all-knowing and the foremost teacher in the school of existence. It is the guide and is invested with high distinction. Thanks to its educating influence, earthly beings have become imbued with a gem-like spirit which outshineth the heavens. So if you want to have a gem-like spirit that outshines the heavens, you have to act with wisdom. If we think about Baha'u'llah also says, by the wise is meant men whose knowledge is not confined to mere words and whose lives have been fruitful and have produced enduring results. So wisdom requires action. It's not just words. You don't sit in a chair and just expound wisdom. You got to get out there and do stuff to make a difference. That's how the world will change, by us getting out there and doing things. And wisdom has to now be applied. It's very important. It's very important that wisdom gets applied to the challenge of building a world of unity. So it doesn't take much wisdom if you're not committed to building unity. Because you can do whatever you like, because you don't really care whether people are united. You don't care what happens as a result. So if you apply this faculty of wisdom to doing whatever you like, then all kinds of unbelievable things could happen, none of which are very valuable to the world. So the fact that we have this characteristic of wisdom, and it's demonstrated by action, it has to be applied to a vision. And what is that vision that we're all questing for? Sometimes I think if you sat back and you thought, what would God really want? If he sat back and looked around, what would he really want? It would become possible to clear away a lot of things. Of course, wisdom has a focus and a purpose in this day. It can't just be wise to just wander around being wise, because how would you demonstrate that you were wise? You could do whatever you like. It is to be utilized to establish the unity and oneness of humankind. The next stage in the evolution of humankind is to reach this goal. Now, we might think that's apple pie and ice cream, but there's a lot of references about other beings in other worlds. They're coming to visit in the future. We do not want to be killing each other still when that happens. That won't look good. It won't look good at all. And it won't be good. And it will look very barbaric. We think we have to unite mankind because that would be nice. We have to unite mankind because our survival and our life depends on it. The growth of the planet and the future in all the universe depends on it. There's a lot at stake. It's not just a minor thing. That's why Baha'u'llah says, let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self. It's only through this consideration and service of the whole of mankind that we will transform our deficiencies into strengths as a people. So now I'm going to finish with this quotation. Otherwise, I'll go on, and heaven knows what will happen to you, because I have a tremendous capacity to go on and on. I just want you to know there's no shortage of that. So in the end, Abdu'l-Baha says this about detachment. All that has been created is for man, who is at the apex of creation, the highest point of creation, who must be thankful for the divine bestowals. All material things are for us, so that through our gratitude, we may learn to understand life as a divine benefit. Therefore, we must be happy and pass our time in praises, appreciating all things. But there's something else, detachment. We can appreciate without attaching ourselves to the things of this world. It sometimes happens that if a man loses his fortune, he is so disheartened that he dies or becomes insane. While enjoying the things of this world, we must remember that perhaps one day we shall have to do without them. Attach not thyself to anything, unless in it thou seest the reality of God. This is the first step into the court of eternity. The earth life lasts but a short time, even as its benefits are transitory. That which is temporary does not deserve our heart's attachment. Detachment does not consist in setting fire to one's house or becoming bankrupt or throwing one's fortune out of the window, or even in giving away all one's possessions. Detachment consists in refraining from letting our possessions possess us. A banker whose occupation does not prevent him from serving humanity is detached. A poor man can be attached to a small thing. There are many rich people who are detached and many poor who are not. So, but one thing we must be, he says, is happy. And the sign of materialism is entitlement. If you want to know if you're materialistic, you feel entitled. You think the world owes you. You think it should be giving you more. You think you should get everything you want. That's a materialistic, entitled person. That's how you feel. If you're a spiritual person, you think you should be grateful for a little small bowl, for anything in your house, for having a house, for having a car. There's no end to what you should be grateful for. And all of it, we should know that we don't deserve, but because of God's blessing, we got it. If we act like that, then we'll never be arrogant, but you can't pretend to act like that. It has to be real, because God only wants to do authentic things. As the Guyanese say, he doesn't want to do play. You know, he doesn't play games with you. He knows what you're really thinking. So straighten out your thoughts, because you may fool your neighbor, but you're not going to fool him. So you got to make sure that humility is real, that you really realize that the guy beside you can have a brighter thought than you. And that's true. It doesn't matter what his background or education is. In order to understand the oneness of humanity, we have to understand that God can make the brightest truth, the most brilliant discovery appear in anyone's mind that he wishes. And he can withhold it from the brightest of all, because it's in his control. Just like he says, for those of us who are a little scared sometime, he can sink the greatest of ships in the calmest of seas, and he can save the smallest of craft in the greatest of storms, because we are at his will breathing. And we hope that while we're breathing, we can be of service by making others' lives a little happier, even just a little. Then we would have been of some service to someone around us. Anyway, I shouldn't have you become patient and long-suffering, although I do have the capacity to develop that virtue in you by going on and on, but I think we've done enough damage for one night. And you can maybe some thoughts got stirred up in you or some exciting ideas, but just recognize that everything is happening. Mark Wedge, my friend, used to say, everything is happening just the way it should. The secret to this life is to be content with what God has ordained, and then to do your best with what you have. I should have told a joke or two, but you know. You can tell the jokes, okay?
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Naylor. That was amazing, as usual, of course. Thank you so much. We have some time now if anyone has any questions, so please feel free to unmute and go right ahead.
Can I ask you a question, God? From where did you bring the last quotation that you read for us about detachment? Oh, the source of it.
That's a good one, because I think there's a lot of prejudice against rich people, don't you? It's good to know. It's good to know that you can have as much money as you like, just do good things with it. All right, so it's actually Abdul Baha. The source of it is, it's in Divine Philosophy, page 104 to 108.